Hello again and welcome to the County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. We are going to talk today about freedoms and rights in a most unusual application because we all start with individual freedom. It's a cornerstone of our Constitution. But when you abuse the freedoms, you lose some of your rights, but you still need to have rights protected. And that's where jail standards come in. It's a very complex issue. It's kind of a political hot button issue, but we're going to jump in the details. So let's start by finding out exactly what jail standards are.
When a person is incarcerated, they lose some of their liberties, but it is important that their rights are still protected. There are many moving parts within the jails that are hard to understand without being directly involved in their operation.
Another misperception might be that criminal activity stops once that person comes to jail, and that's not necessarily the case. So we as administrators we need to make sure that we are holding our prisoners accountable for violating those rules, again, to keep everybody safe.
For the people who work with those who are incarcerated, it becomes important to have policies to work with that protect the inmates' rights, protect the officers in the jail, and that create a defensible position for the jail should there be litigation. That's resulted in over 600 standards that have been established to help sheriffs and jail commanders create policies within their individual jails, such as the standard that covers restraints of inmates who are brought to the jail, which states that a person brought to jail should be handcuffed with their hands behind their backs. The jail policy would then expand upon that standard.
The standards are providing the umbrella. What are the legal aspects of each one of these 600 things that we're talking about? Policies and procedures are very specific to a particular circumstance in a particular jail. Standards, the same standard will fit all 29 of my jails, but the same policy will fit one.
And the standards are legally based, which is really, really important so that officers know what is legally required of them. And because ultimately that's what a court is going to look at, is what's legally required of these officers. And so the standards, this uniform standard, allows these officers the opportunity to take those standards and work with their administration and work with their county attorneys and put together good policies that are legal-based policies. And then they can train in the department, and then the Sheriff's Association provides this resource, so it ties it back to those standards and allows that training to take place so that everyone is basically on the same page.
Having standards to work from creates a more structured and consistent way for jail commanders and sheriffs to do their jobs without trying to fit within a one-size-fits-all regulation or having nothing to work from at all. For the County Seat, I'm Derek Dowsett.
That covers the basics of what jail standards are, but the complexities of the issue require a lot of good brain power at the table. We'll join our panel for that discussion when we come back on the County Seat.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
Exploring is an innate part of being human. What if there was a place on Earth that explores your sense of touch, sound, breath, sight, all year long? So take your time and make it monumental. San Juan County, Utah's Canyon Country, is the place to explore your sense of adventure.
I promised my son that if he got straight A's, we would take a guy's trip, just the two of us. We were riding on a trail outside a place called Minersville, Utah. There was so much to explore, and the trail just kept climbing higher, right to the top of a mountain called Jack's Peak. We just stood there with the whole world below us, not saying much. In fact, not a word. Later, my son turned to me and said, "I love you, Dad." Suddenly, I realized we weren't just camping, we were connecting.
Welcome back to the county seat. Joining us for a conversation on jail standards today are jail commander John Young, who's the jail commander of San Juan County, Gary DeLand, who's the jail operations director for the Utah Sheriff's Association, and we might add the author of the standards, which I believe you said are recognized or adopted by 19 states across the country.
They're being used in 19 states, not necessarily the states themselves, but the individual sheriffs.
Sheriffs, okay. And Paul Wimmer, who's president of the Utah Sheriff's Association and the Tooele County Sheriff. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Paul, good to you're like a regular on the show these days.
Getting to be.
I would like to start the conversation by talking about why the importance of the standards and why they've become so controversial. And I think, Gary, I'll turn to you for that answer.
Certainly. Jails are the most sued entity in the United States. Up until recently, there was a quarter of all the suits filed in the federal court system were filed by inmates. Now that's reduced by about half because of some legislation that took place. But the defense that the sheriff and his jail commander and those that work for them have is something called qualified immunity. You have qualified immunity only if you do not violate clearly established rights. So where do you learn about these rights? There's, you know, if you put them all in a book, well, we've done that in our standards, and there's 600 of those standards. So what these folks want to know is, what do I have to do? What things are required of me to prevent me from losing lawsuits and having the taxpayer money being paid out to inmates? And that's where the standards came in. The sheriffs wanted those as an internal guide to make sure that they knew the things they were supposed to be doing so that they could begin working on them without somebody looking over their shoulder and attacking them for the one or two they may not have done.
Jail standards in the state of Utah did not start at the legislature or the governor's office or corrections and work their way down. They organically are something that have worked their way up, that the jails want to do to improve their own performance and protect rights of the citizens. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a proactive thing. And I can tell you 25 years ago when this started, a lot of sheriffs didn't want to do it because they feared it would be turned against them. But they courageously decided to move forward. And it's, if you look at the record of the litigation record against jails in the state of Utah, it's splendid. A lot better than you'll see, for example, at the prison.
So, Paul, as a sheriff who has a jail under your command, do you feel that the standards have been turned against you, or do you think the way that they're managed right now has been helpful to you?
We've been very effective at managing them up to this point. One of the challenges right now is there is quite a bit of pressure from the legislature to release these standards. And I think actually the legislature is a little bit confused at what standards are relative to policy. I think they think we operate without any kind of governing document, namely a policy or standards. But the reality is we have both. We have standards to set our minimum required to protect the rights of inmates, and we also have policies and procedures that help us execute them standards.
So if you get a lot of frustration from people and the legislature saying, hey, release your standards, everything will be okay. We want to see what you're doing. Tell us about your audits. Why aren't they public? Well, why not? What would the harm be?
A lot of it is the fact that these were built within the Utah Sheriff's Association, and they're voluntary. And when we're taking on a voluntary process for self-improvement to make sure we're consistently operating our jails across the state of Utah, and we open up the results of our inspections, we really open ourselves up to criticism. And why would I volunteer for something that opens myself up to public scrutiny when it really is a voluntary and an internal process for us to be better?
But there could be some people that would look at you and say, oh, you're a jail commander and you're not telling us about your inspections and your self-audits, so therefore you must be hiding something. Do you get that, John?
At times I think we do, but as he was saying, it's an internal process that I want the inspectors to come in and look at me and say, these are some areas that you might be concerned with. so that I know how to improve my own facility, improve my own operations, and give my sheriff a peace of mind that, hey, we're okay, we're doing what we should be doing.
Where do the jail audits happen? Do they happen from your office, or do they happen from your jail commander's office when they self-audit?
Most of it comes out of the jail commander's office. The jail commanders are instrumental in overseeing our adherence to the standards.
Normally audits are outside in. You know, you come in, you're doing these things wrong, we'll be back next year and see if you're doing them right. We took exactly the opposite approach. We want our jail commanders to take a very hard look at themselves, evaluate their own performance, then we bring in the inspectors to see the extent to which they were overly generous or whether they were accurate in their assessments, and then work on those things that they have not yet come into compliance with to provide them technical assistance where we can, do everything we can to raise people up, because we don't want our jails successfully sued. And if you look at our record over the last dozen years or so, I'm not sure we've ever lost a lawsuit in that entire time. And that's, you know, the people who think we're screwing around with inmate rights ought to look at what the federal judges say, because we're not losing cases.
Well, good point. Good point. So when you also, John, serve as an inspector as well as a jail commander. So you don't inspect your own jail, obviously, but you go to another county after they've done an audit. Does it really help that they've checked off some boxes and say, well, we're not good at this, this, and this, and this? How do you help them when they've already identified their problems?
Well, I think that the way the process is set up is ideal. A county will do their own self-inspection, and they'll do their audit of their own policies, their own procedures, and then I'll go in after the fact and look at what they've said and what they've claimed to be compliant with, things that they may have issues with. All of those standards are tied to some legal aspect. There's reasons why we do those certain things, and there's places to look to find that help. A jail commander may call me or email me and say, what about this? Well, if I don't know the answer, I can go to the standard and say, let's look at this and figure it out together.
So there was a lot of criticism originally that there was nothing on jail standards. You guys said you had them, and it looked like you guys were covering for each other, and that's the argument that comes from the legislature. Have you changed that as far as having 100% opaqueness with the jail standards?
No good deed goes unpunished is where this falls. We made an arrangement with the legislature a year ago with non-disclosure and whatnot, so that that certain things would not get out that we did not need out. Allowed that the legislature would have full access to those standards. One of their attorneys worked with it, set it up a system they could go in, put a code word in, and look at every single standard, all 600 of them. It was never used the entire legislative session, except by the attorney for 8 minutes while she was being trained on how to use it. We had a meeting with the legislature, 2 hours. All the sheriffs showed up. I was there. Legislature, which I had been told was so apoplectic about not having the standards, 2 legislators showed up, 1 senator, 1 representative. So I think maybe it's being a little oversold by the legislature how concerned they are, because we've tried to make it available. And last week I had the state auditors down and showed them everything we're doing.
And obviously that'll take some time before that report comes out, but...
Yeah, we brought them down to St. George. I brought the fellow who owns the auditing system, Tate McCotter, and we gave them, ask any questions, anything you want to do. We'll show you anything you want to see. We're not trying to hide something, but neither do we want it available to the ACLU, to have the news media cherry pick things that they haven't got fixed yet. If I were a sheriff and this was available to the press, I wouldn't do it. I would stop. I would try to figure it out on my own, but I wouldn't provide, here's all the things we haven't quite got done yet. Why don't you beat us up in the news media?
And that's a point where I think we will pick up. We're going to take a quick break here on the county seat. We will continue our conversation about jail standards and how they really work and what kind of impact they have on inmate security. We'll be right back with the county seat.
It's the place where excitement and fun collide. The Juab County Fair in Nephi, Utah, August 3rd through the 10th. Prepare for the extraordinary as we push the limits on excitement at the one county fair that others strive to be, from rodeos to carnival fun. And some tickets are still available to see legendary Texas band Lone Star on August 8th. Special price tickets from $10 to $30 at JewabCountyFair.com. Think you know county fairs? Think again. Jewab County Fair, August 3rd through the 10th in Nephi.
All local products have a story of magical places, real people, and delicious recipes spanning generations. So go ahead and discover flavors you've never tasted and friends you never knew you had. Utah's own Discover Local Food.
Make your next adventure at Bear Lake. The Bear Lake Valley has something for everyone, all year long. Scenery, skies, water, or wildlife. You'll find what you're looking for at Bear Lake. Bear Lake, where families play year-round.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking about jail standards. We've kind of talked about some of the controversy that seems to circle around them, but obviously, as Gary told us a little bit earlier, well, if the standards were nefarious, then there would be a lot more lawsuits and the jails just don't get sued very much. What kind of a role does training play in all of this? Because if you've got 600 standards and you've got 200 or 300 jailers across the state, and I'm not exactly sure what the number is, that sounds like a lot of training and probably a lot of refreshing. How does your education system work?
Well, we started out a few years ago just providing general training. Then got the sheriffs to agree to start what's called JCCA, the Jail Commander Certification Academy. Originally I set it up just for the 20-plus jail commanders, but we've got 60, 70 people very often coming to the training classes. We didn't just say, Lieutenant so-and-so or Sergeant so-and-so, could you go tell these people what you know? We bring in instructors from all over the United States to train in this training program. It requires 120 hours of training. It requires 100% success passing the tests after the training to see if you actually learned anything. And then we give a bar that they wear on their uniform, those that succeed. Every year when we have our annual conference at the awards banquet, those that have accomplished it that year come up and get their awards and are recognized by the 300 or 400 people in that room.
So this is like a one-time training sort of thing where you come in and you need to get the basics, but several of Utah's industries require continuing education. Doesn't matter if you're a doctor or you're a car dealer, you have to have so many hours of continuing education. Does that apply to jails? Absolutely. Our annual conference, a large part of its content is based on corrections training and the JCCA training that are based on the standards. We have to train in what we're trying to teach or what we're trying to accomplish, and these accomplish it. Corrections training really isn't as readily available as, say, a road deputy, law enforcement officer training. You have that everywhere and all over the state. But trying to find corrections training is a little more challenging, and the Utah Sheriff's Association's conference and this JCCA training has accomplished that. So as I sit here and think about this, I'm thinking this has got to be a moving playing field. There's a backfield in motion here because, you've written justifications, you've got explanations behind each of those standards, which are kind of proprietary. Again, you said okay, very proprietary, so that they don't become fodder for useless litigation. But it seems to me that court cases are continuing to go on all the time. Are you finding that your standards have to be updated consistently, Gary?
I spend about $2,000 a month, not just for the sheriffs, but I spend about $2,000 a month in legal research. I have a researcher that's in my office. several hours a day, 5 days a week. And I have probably one of the most extensive systems of gaining that information and putting it where it can be instantly retrieved. Because, you know, my standard's being used in Michigan and Hawaii and Alabama, Arizona, all over the place. But it's a dynamic thing. The law changes fast. You've got 12 circuit courts of appeals. You got the Supreme Court, and then you got about 100 individual judges at trial courts that often create law on their own. So I have to keep up with all of that, and then make sure that whatever's going on in the 10th Circuit or anything that would apply to the Utah system, that gets into their standards, and dozens of changes are made every year in the standards.
So, John, when you do your self-audit each year and you bring in an inspector and you look at it, you know, every sheriff's department will confess we never hit 100%. But how much of that is just because there's this constant change, and how often are you having to adjust policy that you put in your jail in San Juan County just to keep up with new legal standards that are coming along?
There's a handful of policies every year that we've got to update because of the case law change. Because corrections law is constantly changing. It's something we have to do all year long, every day of the week. It's something we can't just sit back and let it go.
Are some of these changes expensive, Paul?
We haven't found any of them too cost prohibitive, but you know, but we've been successful in avoiding having to abide by like PREA. If you were to force us to comply with PREA law, then yeah, that would get very, very expensive for a lot of counties statewide.
So there haven't been any cases where everybody's got to have like a 3D curved screen television in their jail cell as a requirement for fair and humane treatment.
You get sued for some of that stuff, chunky peanut butter rather than smooth, that kind of stuff. But that's one of the things, the Prison Litigation Reform Act that Congress passed back in 95, 96. That has really helped us limit how much inmates can sue for the frivolous lawsuits. But real lawsuits where we're actually violating someone's rights, presumably, the courts hear those and they hear them hard. But we have been successful in avoiding adverse rulings anytime a jail has been sued, and that's what we want to keep doing.
Okay, well that proves that there's some success in the system.
A lot of success.
Okay, we're going to take our last commercial break. When we come back, I've got one final question that I think is going to take the 2 minutes we have left to answer. We'll be right back on the County Seat.
I moved to Beaver, Utah from Kansas City, Kansas, specifically for this store. I got to help out with the grand opening, and I was really moved by how much the store, this brand, and these cheese products are loved. This resource, this tool was very easy for us to pick out from the crowd because of the support that the state gives. Not only are they there to help you financially grow or economically support your community, they're there as a supportive resource for talking through that process and being there in the long term. It's not just a check-in, check-out, which helped us expand upon this idea of being a cheese shop out of a plant to being a whole consumer experience. The creamery is very unique to the local area because our Utah farmers are the ones who supply the milk. They have a lot of pride in being able to see the store and what it can put out and how it interacts with consumers. So it's very important for us to be able to grow and to spread their message or spread their product and share our love for dairy. It was originally established when local Utah dairy farmers came together to build the plant here in Beaver, Utah. Since then, we've grown to what we are now, which is a full experiential retail space where customers come from all over the United States just to stop and try our products, experience the store, and meet our staff, who are honestly one of the key tie-ins to people stopping through, is that friendly experience that people get to see every day.
Mountains to explore. Adventure to be had. A town to fall in love with. Yes, all that in Park City, Utah. Start your adventure at visitparkcity.com.
Make your next adventure at Bear Lake. The Bear Lake Valley has something for everyone, all year long. Scenery, skies, water, or wildlife. You'll find what you're looking for at Bear Lake. Bear Lake, where families play year-round.
Welcome back to the county seat. You know, there's one question that this whole thing leads me to, because you've talked about the need to keep parts of the standards, the rationale and the case litigation behind them away from public scrutiny. If that had changed and all of those standards were out there, how would it affect how the jails work in Utah?
Well, I can tell you from my end, I couldn't afford to do it anymore because I've already had 2 big companies try to steal the standards, try to get access to those standards. And one of them just recently I broke off negotiations with because they wanted to buy my standards, and for an awful lot of money. But I keep those things secret because, you know, they're mine, and it's how I compete across the United States. And as I mentioned on the break, I travel about 70,000 miles a year doing this stuff.
So what kind of impact would all that case law and everything have on your jail?
Well, you have to look at if your attorneys, if someone wants to sue you, their attorneys already have all the ammo they have. You've done part of their job for them, and the last thing you want to do is be their best provider of information to sue you.
So if your audits were public, you'd have a lot of problems.
We would be criticized. We wouldn't be criticized for the 550 we got right. We'd be criticized for the 50 we got wrong. We wouldn't be praised. We would be
eviscerated?
Yes. They would go after us, you know, and it could be very, very minor stuff, but they would point out that Sheriff Wimmer in his jail is not adhering to these standards.
He's not meeting the bubblegum standard.
No coach wants to go into a game handing the opposite coach their game plan.
Okay, so my question for you is the final question of our conversation today, John, is you've got these 600 standards. You go through an inspection every year. You go through self-audits. Are you getting closer to the goal each year?
I think so, and I think that's the whole reason behind it, is so that we can get closer and closer and closer.
We can show that the jails are improving because we have the ability to flash all that stuff with computers up on a screen to show how each and every county is doing on each and every standard. But if we were turning over all that case law, you know, doing the work for the attorneys, you know, let them look it up. Hell, they've got law clerks. But, you know, we're doing this to make ourselves better. And as soon as making ourselves better begins to hurt us, then these guys are crazy if they follow through with the process and just continue handing ammunition out to people to cherry pick what they want to come after them on.
Gentlemen, a very interesting perspective. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for tuning in and sticking with us. Remember, local government and law enforcement is where your life happens. Be more than a bystander, be involved, and join us each week to learn about these things on the county seat. We'll see you next week.